Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, kids of all ages, it's another Mattriarchy. I am Matt Rhys, coming to you from Scottsbluff, Nebraska, where it has just the hint of spring in the air about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then it's cold the rest of the day. So that's where we've been. How are you? Tonight, we are joined by Donald J. Thump, also known as Tim Lim, indie artist extraordinaire, and his partner in crime, Mark Pellegrini. Thank you guys for coming on.
Glad to be here again. This is wonderful. Happy New Year to you. Happy New Year to all of your listeners and your watchers as well.
Well, yeah, man, good to talk to you. It's been a while.
Yeah, I've actually I don't think you and I have ever spoken voice to voice, Mark. So
we haven't. You haven't been in one of those group chats with?
No, I don't think so.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, then it's good to finally talk to you in person.
Yeah. Yes. I know we've DM'd and emailed and that kind of thing, and I've sought the wisdom of the great Mark Pellegrini a couple times and stuff, but that's different than actually speaking to somebody, and I'm glad you come on my show.
I'm happy to be here. In fact, I'm going to learn some stuff about Kamen America tonight too, like what Tim's release plans are for the crowdsourcing and pre-orders.
Yeah, I saw that somebody was asking, like, what are you doing? And you were like, something?
That's Tim. There'll be a sort of barter system in which you give us money in exchange for goods and services.
You're going to trade rabbit pelts for comics or something? Or?
Yes, I do accept hay.
Timothy Hay, specifically.
Timothy Hay. Yeah.
I used to have a rabbit, my dearly departed Belgian giant.
What is it called? Flemish giant. I love those rabbits, but they don't live very long.
It is sadly true. So.
It's like I think they have the lowest lifespan of rabbits, like at the most maybe 6 years if you're lucky.
Mm-hmm. Well, mine got the disease, I can't remember what they called it. They have the infection of the face glands and everything.
Oh, that sucks.
Well, it happens. Nothing.
How big was your Flemish giant? Is he like that giant Cocoa Puff or whatever that famous Flemish giant is? Or this as big as a dog?
No, not that big. Not that big. She was probably 12 pounds. But
oh wow, that's pretty big.
Geez, that's heavy for a rabbit.
Yeah, maybe we overfed her. I don't know.
Hey, that's how rabbits like to live. They die happy. That's good.
Indeed. So, once again, thank you guys so much for coming on. So, Tim, what is the platform you guys are looking at for the crowdfunding? What's the scheme?
So let me just spill the beans on this channel because this is all very last minute. But I've been consulting with other creators who have done the dual platform approach, Kickstarter and then Indiegogo. And I learned some things today about Kickstarter that I'm not particularly fond of. And the big thing comes down to how you fulfill your campaigns, because at the end of your Kickstarter campaign, you have to contact your buyers and tell them, hey, make sure you click on this link and fill out this address form so that we know where to send your stuff. On the Indiegogo side, it's automatic. Whenever you make a pledge, you have to fill in your backer information, and then that way, even if the campaign ends and you don't do anything, they can still fulfill it. So I was asking two of these creators, like, wait a minute, does that mean that you have people who give you money and at the end of the day, it could be weeks to months and they never contact you with their backer information? And they said yes. And I said, to me, considering how much flack I already get from haters, the last thing I want is some guy going on Twitter 5 months after the campaign ends and be like, the guy, he ripped me off. He took my money and never delivered my book. And I'm like, whoa, no, I don't want that at all. And it just dawned on me that as a Kickstarter backer, I've done that several times, and every time I always thought I was just reconfirming the information that I already gave when I backed the project, but that's not the case. You're actually giving your details for shipping it. So now I'm thinking to myself, there's a part of me that doesn't even want to do Kickstarter. Let's just go straight to Indiegogo. We're used to it, and we can fulfill as early as April if we were to launch by next week, because the book is ready to go. It's 100% complete. If we do Kickstarter Indiegogo, we'll fulfill in April, May at the latest. So I don't know. I'm still gonna have to sit back and think about it. Mark, if you want to think about it too, or if there's anyone listening who definitely wants us to go to Kickstarter route, if there's an overwhelming demand for it, then we'll do the hybrid approach. If not, I am inclined to just go through Indiegogo. But we still have a little bit of time. I have one product that's in production right now, and I'm waiting for it to come in so I can take some photos so that we can actually launch a campaign.
Yeah, it's like Tim said, that the book is already done. In fact, the reason we're a couple minutes late is because I was finishing the second proofread on it. So you're basically just pre-ordering it at this point, because the book's already made. It's just everything that hasn't happened is printing and fulfillment. So, I mean, I know that if we do Kickstarter and Indiegogo, then we service both crowds, the people who have Kickstarter accounts but don't want to make Indiegogo ones, and vice versa. But Tim brings up a good point, and that's the whole Kickstarter thing where when the thing's ready to ship, that's when you send them your address, and then you get the non-responsive person who just isn't paying attention to their email for like 6 months, and then that creates its own problems.
Yeah, for sure. Especially one of those things that, where you have the chance of just blowback on it. It seems almost not worth it. My personal, as a user, I like Indiegogo better because it takes money out now. So I know when I have money, and I usually back it when I have money. As opposed to like, in 60 days, I know I'll have money then. I don't always know that. Something comes up, the car breaks or the, whatever. And I like to know if I have it today, then I can plan for tomorrow better. But if I need it, in 2 months, then who knows, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And on Kickstarter, it subtracts it at the end of the campaign. Now, it depends on how you do your finances. Some people, if they know, I'm going to get my paycheck in 2 weeks and this campaign ends in 3 weeks, sweet. Well, they're okay with that because they give their credit card or whatever, and then it will just deduct it once it ends. But I'm more like you. I typically know on a day-to-day basis how much money I have, and so I don't buy unless I'm ready to buy. So there's pluses and minuses to both platforms. I think Kickstarter has a more competitive, more robust comics platform, but I think that the logistics of having to deal with the nonsense that's the part that concerns me, because one thing that Mark and I pride ourselves on is efficiency. To date, every campaign that we've run, if you've had a problem with it, if your order didn't come in, I mean, we could look that up lickety-split, get your tracking number. We manage the fulfillment. We manage the tracking numbers in terms of us being able to contact fulfillment and get that information. So we always know where something is. That's very different from someone being like, hey, I didn't get my stuff. You ripped me off. I mean, my only answer to that will be, I sent everyone an email, and then their response could be like, well, I didn't get it, or, oh, you mailed it to the wrong address. And then I could say, well, I just gave I just, typed it out to the address, put on the form. So you have this constant back and forth of excuses. To me, that's very inefficient. I want everything streamlined so that there isn't any of that. And I mean, like the Black Ops 2 campaign, for example, we had like no hurdles whatsoever. Within a week, if you hadn't gotten your book, you had already contacted me, and I had already either gotten you a book, replaced one, or found out where your book was. And I like that. And the fulfillment company we're using, with Iconic Comics, they like it too. So I'm almost scared to throw a wrench into things.
Yeah, Matt C's got some experience on Kickstarter, and he's talking about it in the chat right now. And he's bringing up a good point. I mean, we've built kind of our industry, our brand on Indiegogo. That's how we've done all of our pre-order campaigns since we started. And Matt C mentions Kickstarter is only good for people who love Kickstarter. And while it is, I guess, an audience we just haven't appealed to, if you don't want to make an Indiegogo account just because you don't feel like it, I don't know. I mean, I made a Big Bad Toy Store account because Amazon wasn't serving me for the NECA stuff that I wanted to buy recently. I never had a Big Bad Toy Store account before, but I found that I like it better. And I'm going to be doing most of my toy shopping through Big Bad Toy Store from now on. But it's not that hard to make an account.
Yeah, I really think that you look at like what Doug Tenaple's done with his recent Kickstarter for Earthworm Jim, I think it really demonstrates, just based upon the numbers he had on Kickstarter before he did Bigfoot Bill, he was pulling in, he did four six-figure Kickstarters, right? One which was almost $1 million for the video game that escapes my mind at the moment.
Earthworm Jim?
No. There was one he and Pencil Test did a claymation game that was a spiritual successor to Skull Monkeys.
Neverwhere.
Yeah. The Never Heard was the first one, and then Skull Monkeys for PlayStation, and then the same team did Army Krog. And they did almost $1 million on Kickstarter for Army Krog, and put that video game together. It's fun. But anyway, my point is that one of Doug mentioned back in 2018 that he was concerned that it wasn't necessarily whether his Kickstarter crowd was going to come over or not, and then they made, of course, they made Bigfoot Bill, made Earthworm Jim, made hundreds of thousands of dollars on that, and then he took the same project over to Kickstarter, and he's doing, he'll have 40,000 by the time that campaign wraps, but it's not nearly the numbers he had before. So I think it's fairly evidential, given his skill and popularity and everything, that his Kickstarter backers did make those new accounts and come on over to the other platform.
Well, Tim, we work with Iconic Comics for our fulfillment, and I guess it's something you'll have to just discuss with them. If they want to deal with Kickstarter, if they're prepared to deal with any of those additional hurdles that are different fulfillments. Do you think, just from your experience with Iconic Comics, what do you think?
I have a feeling that they would do it, but it's going to be a thorn in their side because I typically get them ready. So what happens is when they know they have a fulfillment coming up, 2 weeks prior, they make the order for everything, the bubble wrap, the boxes, everything. And they have like a storeroom that's set up specifically for fulfillment. But the problem with that is if we're going to have these residual orders, these people who are reporting that they didn't get a book in or didn't even get the email, and let's say they're, God bless them, but let's say they were like on deployment or something, and they don't get the message until like 5 or 6 months later, depending on the number of those people, that could be one of those things where fulfillment could be like, whoa, what is going on here? They don't want to deal with the constant trickle of orders coming in from people who didn't get the memo until later in the year.
Yeah, the fulfillment that never seems to end, that just goes on and on forever because you only do 1 or 2 people at a time.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I don't want to deal with that because like I'm drawing constantly or I'm working, and that's just one more thing that I have to do where I have to look that stuff up, and then that's money out of our pocket. And it also means that in terms of my budgeting, because the way that we budget our projects is after it's all said and done, after the fulfillment is complete and everyone's been paid, then we pay ourselves, you and me. But that means that after those checks are written, any type of order that has to be fulfilled comes out of my paycheck. So if I know that over a period of time that is what's going to happen, that means that over, let's say, 6 months to a year, that means that I'm constantly chipping away at my own income stream to try and resolve some of these issues.
It all sounds very complicated.
That sounds like a real pain. So. Right.
And I think some people who are like, I know John De La Rose does his own fulfillment. I know Preston Poulter does his own fulfillment. That's fine. Low orders and you're prepared for it. But the one thing that they both have in common is that they're writers, and I'm not trying to disparage writers, but it's this idea that when I know that my schedule allocates for a page a day, it is time consuming and taxing to take some time out and deal with that type of thing. So it's just one less headache I want to deal with. But like I said, I'm going to talk to some more of these guys, John De La Rose, Bill Williams, Preston, and kind of get a consensus on what they think we need to do.
And that's one of those things that looking at Preston and JDA, those guys, that they don't just have, a single fulfillment, concept. They do ongoing ordering. And so that makes a big difference over how you're going to approach it. Because because for them, since they're consistently selling new copies of the comics, it doesn't really matter that, oh, I got an email from this guy in, Uzbekistan who now finally told me that. Okay, because I was going to send some to, Vermont anyway, so it's not the same kind of thing, whereas that.
There's another thing that Preston told me today. So whenever they fill out their information at the end of the campaign, he said that the most annoying thing is that, unlike Indiegogo, where you can preemptively stop people from other countries from backing your project by just not offering international shipping, Kickstarter doesn't let you do that. So he said the most annoying thing is that they put on their site on Kickstarter no international shipping. He still gets people filling out that form who are from Sweden and like other countries, because either they didn't realize it or they just thought, oh, I'm just going to put my my address at the end, and maybe they're not going to notice, and then they're going to send me a book anyway. And then Bill has to tell the guy, like, look, I have to either issue you a refund or you have to change your address to an American one, because I can't send you a book. And boy, oh boy, do I not want to deal with that.
Wow, that would be especially awkward having a fulfillment service behind it all too, because it's not even that same. I mean, it's one thing if it's like, no, dude, you don't understand. Like, I just found out about this. I know you emailed, me 2 weeks ago. I'm not doing any of that on hand, and that's a whole different kind of a thing.
Yeah. So again, it's just based on it's not necessarily that we can't do it. It's the headache and the stress of, do we want to do it? And like I said, part of me is, I work constantly. Like, for example, finished the last page of Kamen America last night. Coincidentally, Mark gets me the script for the Magalorian last night too. So it is not going to end. I mean, like, this year we're looking at putting out 5 books total from the beginning of the year to the end. Actually 6, if you include the My Hero Macadamia collection, which should round out the year. So, I mean, it does not stop. I mean, we just keep on working.
Okay, so 6 books. What we got? We've got Kamen America. Walmart 3, the Magalorian. Right.
Soul Finder. Black Ops 3. Kamen America 2. And then the Walmart collection.
Oh God, I have to write a Kamen America 2?
Yeah, because
you didn't tell me that.
So My Hero the Walmart will go into production next week, and that will be about a 32-day process. So that book will be done in March, and it I don't want to reveal things about it. That's going to be done a little bit differently. So after that, we're going to get done in March, which means in March I'm going to get started on Black Ops 3. Black Ops 3 is going to be a 2-month production from beginning to end, which means that will be done in June, early July. At that time, I will be doing editing and lettering on Soul Finder 2, which means that by July, I'll already be ready to start on Kamen America 3. And then we're going to have Walmart, the collection, ready for election season, November. So there you go. That's our timetable.
That's going to have all 3 volumes in it then?
It will have all 3 volumes of My Hero Macadamia, plus some supplemental material, like a bonus 8 to 16 pages for people who get the trade.
Wow.
That's our goal, at least. I mean, that is, like, Mark and I talked about it. If nothing more, we have to get that trade paperback out by November.
Yeah,
we want to synergize with the whole election, because that's when Trump mania is going to be at its peak, is right there in November. So that's the best time to get that trade out. And it's probably going to be our last Walmart book. We may do more if we get the fever for it, but for now we're planning on it just being this trilogy. So we want to go out with a bang. And I haven't heard back from Tim on the script I sent him, so I'm assuming he hates it. And
no, you did. I said it was. Well, I'll use more polite language. I said it was the dumbest thing I'd ever read. which, by the way, means there's no revisions. So I don't know if that was clear, but there are no script changes, so you're good to go.
Yeah.
Thank God. Now I get to start on Black Ops 3.
Yeah.
Oh man. So you guys. That's so much stuff going on. That is awesome, but it's also exhausting. So now, Tim, you've talked about this before. That this is a hobby to you, but it sure doesn't sound like a hobby.
There's days when it doesn't feel like a hobby. No, it's fun, and the good thing is that I have a system now. Mark has seen it. We're going to see what people think of it in the next week or so when we launch a campaign. I have a new art style, and it's the style. I don't even want to say new. I think this is the style. I'm comfortable with it. It's fast. I can draw, ink, color, and letter a page in one day, nonstop. And because I have it figured out, it's gone to the process where I'm all about efficiency and streamlining. So if I can keep at this pace, then it's not laborious. It's something I can actually do and manage. Believe it or not, Mark and I did not talk about this book this whole time I've worked on it. His job ended when he sent in the script, and I said, just wait till it's done, and I'll just show you everything at once, which I did yesterday. And because we treat it as blue-collar work, he hasn't really told me anything about how he's liked it or not. Like, all I got back was, here are the revisions in the script. There's no comments on like, oh, this is really cool or anything like that. So I honestly don't know what Mark thinks about it because I haven't shown him.
It was garbage. Oh my God, take my name off that thing. Yeah, I mean, we get all the oh my God, this is brilliant. Oh my God, this is so funny. Oh my God, we get all that out of the way during the conceptual phase when we have like our Saturday lunches. And we hammer out the plot, we come up with the ideas, and then we all just kind of we just celebrate with how smart and clever we are, and then we actually sit down and do the work, and then we get grouchy and we stop complimenting each other.
I actually can really relate to that. Is having worked on art teams in the past, it's just one of those things where it's always more fun, the idea of it, but making it happen is just so much nose to grindstone that art really is work. And people talk about, oh, it must be great to draw all day. And like, well, yeah, it was also great to, pour, concrete floors and frame houses all day too, but it's exhausting,
Yeah, and luckily, I think we've gone to a point where, I don't know if Mark does this consciously or unconsciously, but basically, the more panels that you have in a book, the more labor there is to it, because you're basically having to put the same level of quality into it's basically having to draw 5 or 6 miniature drawings. Whereas a splash page, even though that's the most visually impressive thing, in my opinion, that's actually easier to draw because you're only focusing on one piece of art.
That's why the 90s comics were full of splash pages every other page. It's so much easier.
Well, I noticed that.
And also because, Mark Silvestri was not that great of a writer.
Yeah, the image guys were all artists, so none of them are very good writers.
I mean, McFarlane understood the. I gotta say, from one of the stuff I've read from Spawn, McFarlane knew story. So I will say that much. I think there's, no Dixon, but he was.
Yeah, I think I know we're gonna get off topic, but I think McFarlane was probably of all of them, he was probably the best at writing because he had practice on his Spider-Man run.
Yeah.
And you can when you read his Spider-Man run, you can actually see his writing get better. Like the first arc, Torment, with the Lizard arc, that was like 2 issues worth of story spread out over 6 issues because he just couldn't everything's got to be lavish and beautiful, and like, oh man, this is actually really boring. But as he went along, he got better. But he only wrote the first 3 issues of Spawn, the first 4 issues of Spawn. I think by issue 5 he was bringing in Alan Moore and Frank Miller and Grant Morrison and all these other professional writers to write the book for him, and maybe he was doing plotting and editing, but he had stopped scripting by that point. But he's still a better writer than Eric Larson, who touts himself as a writer, and he's been doing it for 300 issues and hasn't gotten any better.
Yeah. Larson's a whole topic in itself. No, it's fine. Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to point this out in the chat because thank you to Neo Valentine. He says, I've burnt out on almost all of these books, but you two are some of the small few I'd buy from. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. And this is news that I've talked about here and there, but I think we'll just mention it here. Our game plan for 2020 is all of our books are $10 across the board. So that is to remove the cost prohibitive nature of crowdfunding books. Mark and I split all of our profits 50-50, which means that $10 between the two of us means that we're making $5 a book. Shipping is extra, so it's $5 flat shipping. So it's 15 total, but that we have literally lowered the cost of our production to the bare minimum so that we can actually just at least make it worth our time. So we really hope that we can pass that savings on to people like you, Neo, and we're very grateful for you stopping by and wishing us well.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Neo. And PK Conrad, just FYI, I love 90s comics. Don't get me wrong. Don't misunderstand. I was picking on McFarlane and those guys, but 90s comics was when I was reading. So all my X-Men trades are all 90s comics. I had a complete run of Spawn from 1 through 200. So McFarlane got my money. I can pick on him, but he got my money. So we're all good.
Yeah, I'm actually a lot of my comics I like are 90s, but most of those are DC stuff. Dixon, James Robinson, those guys. I really dig on the universe. Up until very recently, the post-crisis DC universe was my favorite comic book universe, but it's been surpassed. So, and also they killed it. So there you have it.
Yeah, they kind of flip the switch on that one with what was it, Final Crisis or whatever.
Just right there. Yeah. Anyway, so speaking of comic book universes, your stuff, Black Ops and Wall Knight and Kamen America, all take place in roughly the same universe.
Yes and no. Here's the way I like. Well, okay. So Mark was the one who gave me this idea, but it's kind of like, if you remember in the early 2000s when they had the Marvel DC team up, mm-hmm. there was a one shot and there was Batman meets Spider-Man, and in that book they act as if New York and Gotham City were only like a stone's throw away, like it was nothing. They could have just driven over and just encountered each other. Well, when they had the Marvel DC crossover, in that continuity, they were basically saying that they were two separate universes. But right. There's a part that's really funny where the Joker encounters Ben Reilly and he says, "Hey, there's something about you that seems different than our previous encounter." And Ben Reilly is like, "What are you talking about? I've never met you before." And so that's kind of how we treat it, is this idea that we basically play fast and loose with the universe. When they're together, it's just assumed that this is how things are. But when they're separate, there's going to be a few allusions and Easter eggs that kind of hint of something else that's beyond the borders of the page. But in the confines of each individual book, we're not trying to be so steadfast that we have to adhere to every rule.
So their independent continuities don't impact one another. It's basically like, imagine that they're three parallel timelines and they intersect, and when they intersect, that's when their continuities match up, but then they go their separate ways. It's not that they're in separate universes. It's kind of like so Transformers Generation 2 had that crossover with G.I. Joe in the 90s, mm-hmm. and so that's when the G.I. Joe and Transformers continuities intersected. They'd done it once in the past, but then they intersected again. But then they went their separate ways again. And then in the Transformers G2 comic, they blew up San Francisco. But in the G.I. Joe comic, San Francisco was just fine. So that part of continuity didn't impact the other. Even though they still intersected and they still coexisted, their independent timelines did not harm one another. So that's kind of how we're looking at it.
I think that's a reasonable way of looking at crossovers as a whole, too. Because especially if you're looking at that kind of thing when you're working along with another creator, they may have different premises behind their universes, and so that sometimes that can get in the way. I know that Dave Sim and Bob Burden of Cerebus and Flaming Carrot specifically were really good friends back in the day, and they had crossovers, but the world of Cerebus doesn't really fit with the world of Flaming Carrot, and the world of Flaming Carrot doesn't really fit with anything. And so,
yeah, right.
So those events happen, but not necessarily the entirety of the pasts of those stories happen in each individual continuity. So that's a fun way of dealing with it.
The other thing too is that we do have a shared universe with two of the Antarctic Press properties, which are the Punchline series and then Rags. But even then, I think of all of us, the one who's more particular with continuity is Brian. He really wants to make sure that everything at least lines up whenever his character is used. So that's the only time we really have to watch our toes. But outside of that, I don't want to say it's not because our characters don't go through change, but I mean, one thing that we can assure you is that, I mean, our main characters aren't going to die because obviously we like them. We want to keep them going, and we don't do that model of killing off characters just for sales. That our crowdfunding model doesn't allow for that because of the time frame in which they come out. But I know that for Brian, for his wishes, he wants to make sure that everything that we do is in conjunction with his continuity. So luckily, we're the easy end of that, where we're fairly malleable. Like I think in his crossover, he wants to give he wants to give USAGI an opposable thumb. And I was okay with that. And I was just going to explain it away in an issue of Black Ops where it's like, hey, do you remember when the scientists gave you an opposable thumb? And it's like, yeah, it didn't work out very well. Just write it off very easily.
Well, the funny thing about something like that, too, is because, when you in Macadamia, when Trump is giving Pence the tour of the White House, and what happened to the last president? Oh, he was retconned. I have to tell you honestly, like when I read that, I fell out of my chair laughing at my house, and my cup was over, and he was like, "What's so funny?" And I just handed him the book, and he sniffed a little bit, but.
Well, sometimes, so we do play fast and loose with continuity, and I'm not going to spoil anything for Walmart 3 at all, but I just want to say that there is a continuity error between My Hero Macadamia and Walmart First Term Part 2, which we noticed, and we rolled that into the story, and it's actually a major plot point in the Magalorian, Walmart 3. So when we do observe continuity, we try to have some fun with it.
I'm going to have to look for that because I must have missed that. So.
I haven't heard anyone mention it to us so far, so I think some people, and the other thing is that the Walmart books are goofy. They're almost like Mad Magazine, people don't expect continuity from them, so maybe people just didn't register it because the books are so humorous and silly.
Well, and I think one of the things that to look at, like when we have our own universe with Ideal Comics, right? And the thing we've put the most time into has been Forces of Good and Evil. And yes, it has the quality of art of two writers that are pretending to make an art comic for most of the run of it. But with it, we have a situation where it's very much played for laughs. It's very over the top. There's a hero school. There's a villain school. I've gotten questions through the years about why is the government funding a villain school, and we'll explain all of that in time. But with that, we play it for laughs. So there's things that are a little ridiculous, right? Like there's a character who's made of weaponized anthrax powder, and that's who, right? But then in our other character stories, we have ones that are very serious, and we have crime detective stories and all that kind of stuff, where it's very straight line superhero drama kind of stuff. And we wanted to keep that tone where it doesn't affect the world's history, but it may affect the presentation of the world in these different situations, because we thought that just made more sense. And kind of got the idea, well, Chris and I both did, from the Young Justice series in the late 90s, where you have, or early 2000s maybe even, where you've got Robin and Superboy and Impulse, and in their own comics, it's all pretty serious. But when you put them together, it's just a bunch of kids hanging out and goofing around, and all of a sudden things are ridiculous, because it's a vehicle to make fun of being a teenager, and it's a vehicle to have fun at that whole transition. So he said, if they can do it, we can do it. So that was our motivation. So I always, when I first saw when I first saw Black Ops had tied into Macadamia, I was like, well, of course that's how it is. You've got these levels of silly as the thing moves along, and that doesn't necessarily affect representation of the other stories.
Exactly. We do have levels of silliness, and it starts with Wall Might and Magademia, which is a straight up satire parody. It's very, like I said, Mad Magazine. It's very goofy. So nothing in that is to be taken seriously. And then in the middle, we have Kamen America, which is a spin-off of our second Wall Might book, but it's not quite the same tone as Magademia. It has its serious moments, and it has a lot of humor and comedy in it, but it's not a spoof. It's not a satire. So it is going to have continuity. It is going to have character developments and ongoing story arcs, things like that, and consistency. And then we have Black Ops, which is humorous in its premise, but taken straight. We do play the whole thing straight, despite it being about, a rabbit with radioactive powers. And that one I've maintained a really thorough story Bible and character Bible on that one, so that everything stays consistent and the continuity remains airtight as we move forward with our storylines on that one. So that one's the other end of that silliness, meter.
Yeah, I have loved Black Ops, and when Tim was first pitching it, a year and a half ago, I heard it, in the live streams, and I was just like, man, I'm not sure if I can be into something that silly. And then I started looking at some of the individual page breakdowns, and I was like, that you guys shared, and I was like, nah, I gotta check this out. I have to check this out. And it's amazing. I just love it. And part of what it is it's like when you look at any like war type stories that are marketed to a children's audience, whether it's G.I. Joe, whether it was the Nom, whether it was Army at War, the Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commando stuff, any of that stuff, it's a situation where it becomes there's an intrinsic silliness that's part of the seriousness, and you don't get that story across without having just a pinch of this silliness. And the thing I love about it is that it really is, in a lot of ways, the story that G.I. Joe should be. And that's one of the things I love about it. And when I had Tim on just before Christmas, with the other with Brian and a whole bunch of guys, and he was talking about how oh my goodness, I lost my train of thought. Never mind.
You were there. You were in that conversation.
We talked about a lot of stuff.
So with Brian, and things tend to go off the rail whenever Brian mixes alcohol with live streaming.
Oh man, yeah. Brian's he's a weapon of mass distraction. But
look this way though, you brought up G.I. Joe, and actually that's kind of how. So a lot of people, they might not like the Trump stuff, and we get it, right? Because it's political in nature. But the reality is that everything that we've done to this point has all been due to Donald Trump. And I don't mean that necessarily in a kind of romanticized type of way. What I mean by that is our first book was Thumb, which was a political humor book. And because after that, we found out that, hey, no one's doing the Trump stuff. Let's do it. We did My Hero Magademia. But the current iteration of Black Ops was actually going to be a spin-off of My Hero Magademia featuring like Marlon Bundo as a character. Mm-hmm. And then over a time, whenever we would get together and kind of brainstorm and stuff, it just kind of transmogrified into this idea of, you know what, why don't we just create a separate IP that has nothing to do with politics, but let's just keep the rabbit as the main character. And moreover, at the time, we were feeling very disenfranchised by the G.I. Joe comic, which was not good. It just never retained its former glory from the Marvel days. So we were kind of like, okay, what if we make a G.I. Joe comic with a handicap? We don't have a Snake Eyes character who looks really cool and who's really intimidating just looking at him. What if we went like the Ninja Turtles route and had a character that's so goofy on its premise, and our task is to try and have it pay off by having the reader buy into it. And so, I mean, I think that was one of the things that we talked about in that stream was that and how things have changed. So even with Kamen America is a spinoff of Wall Might, which is a satire and a parody of Trump, and it is its own entity that is completely removed from politics.
Yeah. But at the same time, it maintains this pro-American, this naked patriotism in it that I think that is something that is appealing in some ways, that people just still, and that there's a market for it. People want Captain America, and if they can't get Captain America, well then maybe let's get the next best thing. No, this is better. I think that's part of the appeal of some of that stuff, because it's not like it's a takeoff of Captain America. It's not like it's just a pastiche of that. It's its own thing, but it's at the same time it has that the same energy, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, thank you. And that's one of the things that I feel very strongly about. Mark feels strongly about. We have a very I don't know if I can't speak for Mark. He can speak for himself, but I have a very full-throated type of patriotism. It's kind of the Walt Disney, Pollyanna, Americana type of patriotism. That's one of the things I like about Donald Trump, is love him or hate him, he loves America almost to embrace all of its stereotypes of America. The whole thing of him like eating KFC buckets on a plane with a gold fork and knife, I love that. Like, I love everything about that, and everything that we've created so far has had kind of a patriotic backdrop to it, and that's not really by accident. But on the other hand, it's not also something that we force. It's something that to us, I think, comes very naturally.
Well, it's exactly. So we created Black Ops, as Tim said, to try and create the G.I. Joe comic we wanted that wasn't getting made right now. And the reason we put so much patriotism, one, is because we genuinely feel that way. We love our country. We love what our country can be, what it has been, what it will be, and even what it is, especially right now over this past 3 years. We loved it. But with that, we're not being served. People who feel like Tim and I about America, patriots, we aren't being served by media, and we haven't been for a long time. And we wanted to create something that would serve the people who feel the same way we do, that love our country. We are not ashamed to be American. We're proud to be American. We don't think that, who was that guy from New York, that jerk ass that said, America won't be great again. It was never that great. Who was that?
Yeah, I can't remember the guy.
Yeah, that guy. I mean, he represents the kind of people that the mass media is currently making entertainment for. This idea that, these people who hate America, who think America was never that great, that's everything that we're getting in our entertainment media, and that's all we've been getting for a very long time.
And the weird thing about that to me is, at the same time, you have, whenever somebody goes on a limb to make a blatantly patriotic American movie, it goes gangbusters, right? American Sniper, 12 Strong. People love those freaking things. And, then the studios are like, I think we've had enough of that, thank you.
Well, the audiences love it. It's the Rotten Tomatoes critics who then gang pile on and call it jingoistic or racist or sexist or revisionist history because America was never that great, etc. And so that's what the studio hears. The studio's like, oh, the critics didn't like it, and we've got an 18% at Rotten Tomatoes. We better never make a movie like that ever again. That's the message that's getting promoted. Whereas the general audience, Americans who love their country, want that sort of thing. And hey, that's what happened when we went out to make our first Trump book, which was Thump the First 100 Days, that comedy book that we did. There weren't any pro-Trump humor books out there, and everyone said nobody likes Trump, nobody wants it, there is no market for this thing whatsoever. And then we made it, and it went through 9 printings. And in fact, it's still going through printings because I just got another royalty check from the publisher on that one. So it did just fine. And
so have they done a 10th printing now?
I think I just lost count. The last time I saw it was on time.
last time. Well, and here's the thing: is I looked about a month ago, and Antarctic had on their website said that 9th printing out of print. So if you just got to check, they didn't just print another.
So that's Magademia. So this is Thump, the First 100 Days. That's the one that's gone. Yeah. I think when we wrote that that solicit for Magademia where we talked about Thump and said that it's been through 9 printings, that was 2 years ago. So yeah, by now it's probably on, like, I don't even know anymore. Yeah, like Tim said, we stopped counting. But that's the thing, is that people wanted that book. There was a market for it. It's just that the media insiders were insisting that those people didn't exist, and so they did not want anybody to make products to serve that audience. We made a product to serve that audience, and then they liked it, so we're making more. And that's the same thing with why we include patriotism as a running theme in so many of our books, is because nobody else out there wants to make a patriotic book, because whatever forces that be say, don't do that, that's wrong, America is bad, America was never that great. But we're making these books anyway, and people are buying them because they feel the same way that we do.
One of the things that I really love about the way you guys went around it was, like, with our universe, we have a kind of a long and involved path of deconstruction to a reconstruction of the American spirit. And we had this huge vision in 2005 to lay out this super involved, complex story of government corruption and the whole, before Deep State was a tagline, we had this idea to do a story about that, and we're still working it out because it was such a big thing and everything. But you guys are able to just cut right in the middle of all of it, and it's in a way that kind of stirs the heart of people that actually give a damn about that kind of stuff. And so I really appreciate the candor and the maybe even the stones to jump into that pool.
Well, we know that it closed a lot of doors on us, because a lot of the mainstream media, mainstream publishers will never touch us now because we've done books like this. Like those doors are shut on us forever. And there's a lot of people out there who maybe do want to make the same kind of books we do, but they're still afraid that Marvel will never hire them, or DC will never hire them, or they'll never get a job, with a mainstream publisher, because if they make a book with a conservative slant to it, or if they make a patriotic book, or they just do something a little wrong, then all those doors are going to slam shut. And so there's a lot of people out there who are just too afraid. And Tim and I, like we said, we do this stuff part-time. We have our day jobs. We have our 40-hour-a-week gigs that we do. And so we're not afraid to have those doors shut on us, because that just means we get to do exactly what we want to do.
And it's one of those things. I don't know if you guys follow at all Andrew Klavan. I haven't been routine on that, but one of the things he said that I think is most interesting is that reality gets a vote. When people get to look at quality, they get to see what it really is, and that's one of the things I appreciate about your books, is that when people look at them, after the hubbub or after the thing, they can still see that it's a damn fine comic. You know what I mean? And that's regardless of what else you take on it. And yeah, I think that's a real big deal. I think that's one of the things that makes it stand out, not just the quantity of the work that you guys put out, but the continued quality of all of it. So
thank you.
Very look forward to what you have. But let's kind of focus in and tell us a little bit about the first issue of Kamen America. What kind of thing can we expect? And so, for those of you who might not know, Tim, explain the name.
Explain the name, Kamen America. So it harkens back to Kamen Rider, which apparently is a lot more popular than I thought. Apparently, a lot of people grew up watching it. So originally, when we were thinking about it, it was going to kind of harken back to kind of these tokusatsu, Super Sentai type motifs. And because what happened was, when we had Walmite, we had this character we introduced named Warhen. And honestly, she was a throwaway character and was a parody of Carol Danvers. But I remember, like, when I tweeted that image out, people like blew up my DMs, and it was retweeted. I think it was retweeted more than the actual campaign itself. And it was like, who's this character? This character's really cool. And at that point, I was talking to Mark, and I thought, Trump isn't going to be in office forever. And even if he's in office for another 4 years, which, is looking very, very likely, he is going to have this 4-year slide where he is going to fulfill his last term in office, and we have to start thinking about what we do, because Walmart won't last forever as a parody or satire. So how do we take some of the things, the humor that we wanted to put into My Hero Macadamia, and transpose that into something new. Let's have a female-led book. And so I will tell you this, if anyone is in the chat, I'm going to tell you the hardest thing ever. Normally, Mark and I are pretty, I don't want to say clever, but we're very resourceful at coming up with funny names for things. Try thinking of a patriotic superhero who hasn't already been done. Like,
I
it
wanted
is
to kill
impossible.
myself. That was the hardest thing ever.
It was hard.
Coming up with like patriotic names that aren't done or aren't stupid. Archers and speedsters are the hardest.
Oh man, I was surprised that a recent speedster somehow managed to land the name Godspeed. Because one, that's a great name. Two, no one had ever taken that before. I don't believe it. But yeah, patriotic females, like you think of like, Miss
Liberty
America,
Bell.
taken. Liberty Bell, taken. Lady Liberty,
American
taken.
Made.
American Made, taken. Made in USA, taken. Like, oh my God, we just kept Googling. Every time we came up with a pun, we'd Google it and someone had it. It's impossible.
Hey, has there ever been a Columbia?
Yes. And
I love it. You're instantly like, yes.
so if oh my gosh, should I say this? So there was one name. It's Liberty something. I'm not going to say what the last part was, just in case I want to use it later on. But there was one, and I said, "What do you think of this, Mark?" And he was like, F it, let's just go with that. But there was a part of me that was like, I'm not satisfied with it. Like, it just doesn't have a ring to it. And then it just dawned on me, like everything we've done so far, whether it's like USAGI, which is, Usagi, Patrioter, right? There's always like this ring to it. And then it dawned on me, I was like, we want to create a female superhero, basically like our Captain America. And I was watching anime one day, and I just happened to see, I think it was Crunchyroll or Funimation. I was scrolling up, and they had like Sailor Moon Crystal, and in Sailor Moon Crystal, there's a character of Tuxedo Mask, Tuxedo Common, and I was like, Kamen America, Captain America, Kamen America, Kamen Rider. I like it, and I sat on it for 24 hours, and I couldn't get it out of my head. I was like, that's the name, and so I told Mark, and Mark was like, just look on the trademark registry, make sure it's not taken. And I looked, hadn't been taken, no one's used it, and I was like, well, we're claiming that stake. So
yeah, when Tim brought that to me, I was like, that's perfect. Yeah, that's why I was like, please check to make sure that's not taken, because that name is great. It's one of those names that started bursting the ideas. Like, that's a whole new spin on it. We're going to do this like Wonder Woman, Ms. Marvel, Captain Marvel kind of parody at first, but bringing in like the Kamen Rider, the Tokusatsu Super Sentai stuff, like that. Like, oh, so we've got this character whose first part of their name is a Japanese word, then the second part of their name is America. So we can do this merging of Japanese superheroes with American superheroes. And I've watched a lot of Ultraman, I've watched Kamen Rider, I've watched Super Sentai and Power Rangers and Godzilla films. And like, oh man, I could put in all this stuff that I know if we go this angle plus the American comic book route. Like, there's so many new avenues we can do. So it's like, oh, the name itself just opened up the story.
And this is extra interesting to me because, like, I have, until about 3 weeks ago, I had never read a manga, right?
Wow.
I hadn't seen one that caught my eye, right? And but I recently picked up a copy of My Hero Academia, the first volume they had at Walmart for $7.
That's a good one to start off with.
I can lose $7, right?
Right.
And two things happened when I read that. First of all, it's a love letter to Western comics, to American comics, and that's awesome. And it does everything that American classic superhero comics should do. It's great. And second of all, it made me appreciate Magademia so much more because I got the jokes, all of them, not just the ones I had already gotten. But it was sort of like, because you guys did such a great pastiche of it. It's just amazing, right? So so it's really interesting to kind of see how you guys are looking to play with those things, because I've been in the middle of that myself, kind of going through all of that. In fact, in 2 weeks, number one Marmaduke fan and Matt Krotz are going to come on, and we're going to do a book club of My Hero Academia, because Matt tries to convince me that superheroes aren't as important as I think they are. So we're going to have a lot of time with that. So I'm a diehard superhero guy.
Well, and I think I think what you'll like about Kamen America, and it's going to be a really tough one when we start to market it, and we'll tell you some details off air, but it looks like a superhero comic, but again, because we're playing on so many tropes of like Sentai, for example, like one thing that she does is she fights giant monsters. So looking at the book, I mean, like its surface quality looks very superhero-like, but I would say that its DNA is definitely rooted in more. I don't know, Mark. What would you say? Its DNA is definitely rooted in other concepts.
So I mean the tokusatsu is very, it's superficial, but not in a shallow way. It sounds bad when I say superficial, but the way the heroes conduct themselves and the kinds of monsters they fight and the action and the scenarios are very much out of Sailor Moon and Ultraman and Kamen Rider and Power Rangers. But the core of the story, the essence, the sort of narrative we're spinning is very much embedded in Western comics. So it is a hybrid. But it is written by and drawn by two Americans, so obviously it's going to be coming from an American perspective. So that's unavoidable.
Well, and that's one of the things that I think is really interesting too, because like so much of the Japanese paradigm, right, was influenced by the mid-century American comics and American films, and
yes.
We don't really have the giant monsters in American comics anymore, but we did in the 50s. I mean, that was totally normal for Batman to be like, I need a new Batplane to fight the giant moth, or whatever it was. That was a totally normal theme up until the 70s, right? And
yes.
To kind of see it, like, okay, so that really influenced Japanese comics, and now having it come back around with you guys, and I'm super stoked for the Sporkman project that they're just that hopefully will be out in the next couple months, and that kind of stuff, and of course, well, I probably shouldn't talk too much about other things that I know, but I mean that influence is kind of feeding back into itself into really fun ways. I mean, I'm sorry,
you bring up a very good point. Like, for example, you have the Studio Ghibli movies, and a lot of Japanese animation was actually inspired by Walt Disney animation. So a lot of and the Japanese have always been very good at that. They're a very industrious nation, but they're notorious for just taking a lot of Western inventions and motifs and kind of engineering or plussing them into something new.
My Hero Academia. That's just straight up American superheroes, but done through the lens of Japanese storytelling with the ranking systems and the power levels and all the bureaucracy and stuff. It's very much a Japanese perspective on American superheroes.
Well, yeah, and the whole Japanese. It's also got a little fun, wink and a nod to the cliches about Japanese schooling too. The politics involved in all of that, and that's interesting to me. Because one of the sub-themes in my webcomic, Force of Good and Evil, is I'm poking slightly less than gentle fun at the American school system with that.
Well, and for example, so the two properties that do it really well are My Hero Academia, which it's I guess it's more like shonen, obviously, but I personally prefer One Punch Man better. Even though I think One Punch Man, I don't know about its longevity. For example, I'm on volume 16 and I like it, but I feel like I've already reached a cutoff point where I'm like, I think as far as the story is concerned, I'm pretty satisfied with where it is at the moment, and I don't foresee myself necessarily continuing as a collector of the manga itself. But now it's kind of like we're looking at anime and manga, and we're hopefully learning from them who have learned from us. And I know that Mark is a little bit more resistant to checking it out just from personal biases he has, but that's okay because I'm doing my homework and I'm looking at a lot of anime and manga and being like, how in the world are they making this so good? Because I think that a lot of the novel storytelling that is coming out of Japan is because they're looking at us and they're seeing what we're doing and seeing our mistakes, and they're like, we're going to take this but make it better. And I think that's why you see like My Hero Academia, love it or hate it, it's so wildly popular, even though it's like the Japanese take on the superhero genre.
Well, and I think a big part of it too is like, you can't, I don't know that you could map it directly, because I think the American superhero comics started faltering way before that. But almost like Japan said, wait, all of the American comics suck. Let's do them right at about 2014, which is at a time when a lot of Americans noticed the superhero comics started sucking. They had been for 10 years already, but they hadn't noticed it yet.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to point something out real quick. So Neostar, the thing that you put up, Neostar Productions, he says, personally, I like the idea of mixing Eastern and Western elements in comics. So I don't want to tease any of the art out, even though it's all finished, but I don't know if Mark noticed this or not. Kamen America, here's my new style, or I think the style that I'm very, very, very comfortable with now. All of my foreground figures are drawn in an anime style. All of the backgrounds are drawn in a 1950s American style. I don't even know if Mark picked up on that or not.
I didn't pick up on the 1950s American style because I don't want to give away plot points, but there's parts of the story that take place in towns that are in the Midwest. So I just assumed that the towns are, Midwest, so they look more old-fashioned. But I'm going to have to go back and do a third proofread.
That's actually really, really interesting to me personally.
I know. And I'll tell you something, Matt, we were going to set it in Nebraska. We were. And in fact, I think I used Nebraska as all of my reference photos, but it's in Indiana because we have to stick with the continuity. So
that's fine.
That's our little secret.
That's pretty awesome. But I think you guys may have seen, but Carl, who's in the chat, and I are working on a project very slowly because of restrictions on it, but that is set in Nebraska. And Carl's style is this awesome blend of mid-century Japanese stuff, Astro Boy, that kind of thing, with like 1930s LZ Seeger, Fleischer Brothers kind of stuff. And
I've seen Carl's stuff on Twitter, yeah.
Oh yeah, it's great. And so we're actually doing it. It's called Mr. Little. Welcome to Lincoln, Mr. Little, and it's going to be a fun little like psychobilly high plains superhero log set in 2005 in Lincoln, Nebraska, and we're hoping to crowdfund that end of the year, but we'll see how that goes out. So.
You said psychobilly. I'm not as familiar with psychobilly as I am rockabilly. I love rockabilly culture.
So psychobilly like Rob Zombie?
Well, it's like pre-Rob Zombie kind of stuff. The band that the word comes from One Piece at a Time by Johnny Cash. But the as applies music style was first kind of adopted by the Cramps. And then other bands kind of have been in that genre where it's this little bit of rockabilly, a little bit of early rock and roll, a little bit of punk rock, kind of all mixed together to be kind of a hard-edged rockabilly sound. And so I'm hoping we'll be able to get that kind of a feel of if rural the rural America, on steroids kind of thing. Our main character, Chad, he's got a superpower that allows him to know the workings of any machine. And so I thought putting him as the ultimate greaser would be a really fun way to kind of play with that. So
now, is he a Chad?
He is. He's working up to that. Actually, we named him back in 05. Well, actually, we named him in 03 when Chris Lawton and I came up with a concept. And with it, we knew the two people we wanted to be in forces was Tony Sizzle in the chat says, I was lost in the manga talk and now suddenly they're talking Johnny Cash. Yes. This is what happens on my show. But yeah, so we knew the characters we wanted for forces, for one kid to be kind of a bully and sent to hero school, and one kid be kind of a goody two-shoes nerd and sent to villain school. And we knew what we wanted, and we knew two people that kind of sort of matched their personalities. And so we're like, we're making a comic. Can I use your first name? Can I use your first name? So I ended up with Chad, who starts off as a villain and ends up being a hero, and Greg, who starts off as a goody two-shoes nerd and then is crushed by villain school. And but he's pretty much a good guy, but he's a Greg. And that was before those were memes. And,
good guy, Greg. Yep.
Those before those were memes, and so it's sort of funny. But yeah, Chad's ultimate destination is to be a the father of his children and the husband to his wife and the hero of his city and the stand-up bold guy that everybody wants to be. So, yeah.
Well, I know Tim is taking an interest in the greaser and psychobilly, rockabilly stuff because he just watched Redline for the first
I was about
time.
to mention that. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Because Tim was just bragging about how he watches so much anime and I don't. Well, I'd seen Redline years before, and then Tim finally just discovered it. He's like, "Oh, where's this movie been all my life?" Like, in my Blu-ray collection, jerk.
That's grand. That's grand. So
You need to check it out if you haven't yet, Matt. Redline. You can rent it on Amazon for I think $2.
I may have to do that.
It's an anime about racing in space, and it took them 7 years to animate it. And I was like they said that it has like a record 200,000 frames of animation, like hand drawn.
Holy crow!
Yeah, it's an absolutely gorgeous film. It's made by Madhouse, the same people who did like Ninja Scroll and Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust, a lot of like normie stuff.
Okay.
And I have I very openly admit that I have normie tastes in anime, so it's hard to get me to watch the more niche stuff that Tim will watch. Like Tim watches an anime about girls who lift dumbbells, and I'm like, all right, that sounds boring, but okay. Meanwhile, I'm like, hey man, have you ever seen this thing called Castle of Cagliostro? Oh, it's so good. Yeah, but what Tim was going on is like, yeah, so Tim watches a lot of anime I don't watch, but then I read a lot of comics and books and watch movies that Tim doesn't watch. Like I've watched all the Ultra series and Power Rangers and all that stuff. So between the two of us, we get a really wide coverage of different media and different pop culture and different literature and movies and music and stuff. And so we can each bring a lot of that into our storytelling. So we basically cover a wide berth.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to kind of realize, because one of the things that one of our company philosophies back in the days is to realize that every story's been told. You as an artist aren't really doing anything other than reinterpreting the world as it exists, and you're not really. We create art, but art's just a reflection of our society, and so I think that it's important to keep a wide mind of the things that we understand and know. Because otherwise, we end up boxing ourselves into uncomfortable places or settling for something that's less than it should be. And so I think that's one of the things with that. But I think it's fun to also talk to people that work as a team, because really good teams they just one fills in where the other person doesn't have, and it's good if you can find it with people that do that without too much tension.
Well, and that's the interesting thing is that, because I think it's the mentality that Mark and I bring to it. We treat it as blue collar work. So I've said this several times in streams, but I'm not a creative person, which means I cannot come up with anything from my own mind. It doesn't happen. Ever since I was a kid, people would be like, draw something, Tim, draw something. And I would never draw. I would just sit there and be like, what do you want me to draw? Anything. I would not draw. He would have to tell me, draw an elephant, draw Spider-Man, draw a tree. And then I would do it. So I've always seen it as a very mechanical process. And that's part of my logic as to why I don't think art is a talent. I think it's a skill that over time you can learn. Now, there are talented artists who I think have kind of a built-in proclivity to it, but as I've said in many art classes, everything I've done so far is all sleight of hand. It's all just basic tricks I've learned in terms of how to create the illusion of something there that's not. And I think it's because of the way we look at the mechanical process of storytelling that we tend to leave our egos at the door. Where Mark will tell me this looks a little bit off, or when I'm lettering, I'll do an edit, and then I trust his judgment if he thinks that it should be changed back to how he intended it, and I think he trusts my judgment if I make a creative decision to put something in there that's not. For example, one thing that happens in Kamen America is we introduce one of Carly's parents in the beginning, But it kind of bothered me that as I was drawing these pages towards the end of the book, he never reappears again, even though we allude to the fact that he's still alive. And I'm like, wait a minute, something doesn't work here, because if your kid was a superhero or fighting giant monsters, wouldn't that be like an important part of your life? So I actually reinserted the dad into the script, and Mark didn't say anything, so I just assumed, okay.
No, I hadn't had a chance to even give you my to talk to you. So this is the first time Tim and I have talked all day, because I've proofread 2 different versions of Kamen America today. I sent him back my initial proofs, and then Tim applied all of them, and then he sent me the PDF again with all the changes. And then I just sent him, the reason I was late, I was 2 minutes late to this, was because I was finishing that up, and I sent him the final proofs that I had, and that's it. So yeah, I haven't even had a chance to give Tim verbal feedback on it. But yeah, things like that, I mean, that's stuff where I didn't think of that. And Tim reading the script, drawing it, and a lot of the times we both read this. I wrote the script. Tim read the script, gave me back his notes. I applied his notes. He started drawing the script. But a lot of times, I know, not to speak for Tim, but I know that he realizes something doesn't work or can be improved as he's drawing it. He's like, hey, why don't we do this? Or why don't I add this? And then that improves it. It's a ongoing creative process as he draws it. So the comic isn't just I write script, Tim draws script, you read book. It's always growing and changing and improving. It's that old Walt Disney term, plussing. We're always plussing it as we go along and improving it. And so that leads to better narrative cohesion, where, he notices something I missed or I noticed something he missed, and it gets better every time we do it.
And it's very rare that we have to subtract anything. We're normally adding stuff. That's kind of the cool thing, is that we're always thinking of new things to put in. And I think part of the difficulty is at some point we have to dial back, because obviously we want to tell more stories. It's just how much of it do we want to tell in such a confined space?
That's one of the things I was talking to Doug Ernst a while back ago, and both of us are of the opinion that writing isn't what you put on the paper, it's what you take off. And
right.
That's that editing is where the real work of writing is done, because anybody can just vomit onto a page, all of their ideas, but to say, well, that doesn't work, and that doesn't work, and that doesn't work. A creative person, I don't think a creative person has a hard time coming up with things to say. It's whether they're worthy of being said.
It's never get married to a first draft, because you should never think that your first pass, you should never consider to be your best. You should want to improve it. You should want to give it a second, third, or however many passes to fine tune it and perfect it. If you have such a massive ego that you think that, oh, this first draft, that's it. I'm going to write straight from brain to page, and what I write is going to be the gospel. It's going to be perfection incarnate. Then you've got a problem if that's your attitude. And I think most people who write, draw, do things creatively relish the opportunity to go back over their work and tighten it up.
And I think that's one of the things too. I mean, I think there's different ways of going about writing. I tend to not start putting words down on the page until I've got a really, really good skeleton. So I don't always have a lot to take away, because I've cut things before they've gotten to that point. But it really depends on the project.
Well, so Tim and I have our collaborations down basically into a well-oiled machine. So what we do is we get together, we conceptualize the plot, the characters, whatever, for our next book. I take all those notes, I combine them into a plot summary. I run the plot summary by Tim. He gives me back his notes. I make the adjustments on the plot summary. Then we do the logistics. Tim says, okay, well, this is how many pages we're going to be doing for this project. And so then I take that plot summary, and then I do the page breakdowns, where I break down, this is what happens on page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Basically, I just segment that plot summary by the pages. And then that's also where I do another revision, where I add things or I change things if I didn't think it working in the flow of the book. Send that back to Tim. He gives me back his notes. And by that point, once we have the page breakdowns, we have the whole book. We know what's going to be on each page. We know we've put in all of our notes, our ideas, our plot threads, our jokes, everything. And then when I write the script, it's just really just extrapolating those ideas and breaking them down into panels per page. And so that's how we're able to knock this stuff out so fast, is that we have our thing down to a process.
That is shockingly like the way I've been writing scripts for the last year. Actually.
Well, we talked to Aaron Sparrow not too long ago, I think on our last Mandalorian stream, and he's like, "That's how I do it too. That's how most writers, I think, figure it out. Is you don't just go from your brain to your script. I mean, maybe some people do, but I think most people, when they're conceptualizing their stories, they do their research, they correlate their ideas, they summarize them before they start writing. There's a lot of work that you do before you start writing a script. And I have collaborated with some artists in the past who didn't have a very high opinion of writers. And their attitude was like, well, Mark, all you're doing is writing a script. How long does that take? Like a couple hours? And like, well, before I even start writing the script, which is what you see, I have to do all this work just to get there, just to have all the ideas and the research. You know, it's not brain to script.
Yeah.
Well, and the problem with that too is that, in that you also, as the writer, you have to live in that world. Like you have to see it, kind of like the movie in your head. And I can't do that. I've said that I'm like a trailer person. That's the most of my creativity. I'm the guy you take to film the trailer, where it's like, I want this scene. I
thought you meant the person that lives in a trailer.
That too.
I don't understand where you're going with that, Tim.
But yeah, no, I'm the type of person who, if there are key moments that I want, but I have no idea about the sinew that actually connects it all together. And Mark and I have talked about that, how that's frustrating, because I empathize with that. Like I've met a lot of very egotistical artists who are like, writing, it's the easy part, the hard part's drawing. And I'm like, dude, I can tell you for one thing, I finished 56 pages of this book, and this script did not come from me. Yes, I changed about 1% of it, but like even then, I don't even think it's perfect. I think that there's still some things that probably could be altered if need be, but that could have not come from me. And I think that's where, I know Mark has signaled that warning, but if you look in the early Image days, that's actually kind of what happened. Image was started by artists, and within like a year they had to start hiring writers because the quality of the work itself, while beautiful, was not living up to like storytelling standards. So I do not diminish the role of writers whatsoever. In fact, quite the opposite. I think they're highly essential to creating good work.
So we do have a question from the chat, is when will Kamen America become available?
So Kamen America will either be available as early as next Wednesday or the Wednesday after. It will depend on the production schedule of a product we're waiting for. I like everything on hand, so I want to have a photo of that product before we actually launch anything.
So that's cool. Very cool. And my question, I do have a question also, is what are the chances of getting one of those sweet USA GI patches that we didn't get last campaign?
We will probably have that for Black Ops 3.
Because I want one.
Instead of a sticker, awesome. We'll probably give everyone a patch.
The sticker was cool, but the squadron badge is just that is badass.
Yeah, I like them too, and we have a manufacturer who can manufacture them for us. Not, I want to say like really cheap, because they're not as cheap as stickers, but definitely within an affordable range if we budget properly. And one thing that we're doing this year is for Black Ops 3, Black Ops 2, I kind of went all out. I mean, I spent a lot of money on different artists, but we've always done our best work whenever it's very bare bones. Like for Kamen America, I only hired, let's see, between Mark and I, Doug Garrett did some music for us, which is awesome. I can't wait for people to hear that. He actually did 2 theme songs for us for trailers and promotion. And
that's awesome, man. Doug is magic with that thing.
This song is beast. He sent it to me, and he said, "Dude, I was like really inspired that you asked me to do some work for you. What do you think about this? Do I need to change anything?" And I listened to it, and I was like, "You don't have to change anything, but I'm gonna give you some advice. You need to get hired by like a video game company to just make music, because like your riffs are killer. Like they're so good."
Yeah, it's ridiculously good. So,
well, we hired him, and then I hired a cover artist, a back cover artist, and then Miss Sashi is doing a pinup. So very minimal. Like I think our overall budget was under $1,000 just for the outside stuff. And we were under budget, which was good, which means that Mark and I did the rest of the labor, and it means that at the end of the day, even if we make like under 10K, it was definitely worth our while to do it.
So very cool, very cool. And how long is Kamen America issue 1 going to be?
It is 56 pages. From this point going forward, there is nothing we do that's going to be under 48 pages.
Okay, so you're doing 56 pages for $10 for a funded book.
Yes, square bound. No stretch goals. Everyone will know what they're getting from the moment they back it. They're essentially pre-ordering a book. We're not trying for stretch goals or more money. We just want to cover our cost of production, and if that means passing that savings on to the reader, we will do it.
Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. That's very cool.
I say that, and then we only get like 10 backers, and I'll be like, "That was a terrible idea."
No, man. I honestly, I think the hype for this book is going to be pretty big. I think that you've got the right blend of pretty and patriotic, and Japan is very in right now. I think you're gonna
I'll tell you one thing. If people know this person in the chat, so I'm not going to show the art, but I'll tell you who did our back cover. Our back cover was done by Cute Sexy Robots, who did our back cover for Black Ops 2. Okay. And I told Cute Sexy Robots, I said, I need this by the first week of February. And I just sent them the concept art. They had it done within 5 days. And they're like, I just got on a roll. Like, I thought this was really cool and prioritized it. And I was like, hey, I'm not complaining, man, or girl. I'm not going to reveal their gender, but I was like, that is really cool. So I think everyone will be happy when they see it.
Yeah, that's really exciting. That's really exciting. So, yeah, I'm stoked about that. On other subject. Okay. Because I'm gonna drastically change the subject off of Kamen America and do you guys have a name for your little niche universe? Is that a thing you guys have, or?
We were gonna call it the Magaverse, but I think Jack Pasovic stole it from us.
The what now?
The Magaverse.
See, I've been calling it the Bunnyverse, and I'm like, I'm not sure that makes sense, but I'm going to go with it because who knows?
Yeah, the Bunnyverse. Mark might not like it. I like it. I like bunnies. I like bunnies a lot.
No, I think it works. I mean, yeah, we don't have I've never thought of an actual name for the universe. Like the Marvel 616 universe or the DC Earth 1, kind of thing. I never really put any thought into that before because. We call it the Bunnyverse, but I guess there's only bunnies in 2 of the books, and we could call it.
When you think about the Magaverse, with Rags coming out there, bunnies are up.
That's crazy. So here's the other thing. So the logo for Black Ops was actually a derivative of the rabbit logo from Rags, but in the Bun Shot crossover, the one that he's working on right now, he actually ties them together because people, if you've read Black Ops, you know that USAGI is essentially immortal. He's a cryptid. So he's been alive since World War II, which meant that he was part of a lot of special operations, which means that at some point, Regina Rogowski and him were on the same force together. And I don't want to give away like how that's connected, but it does imply that the logo is is a shared thing, which it's meta referential because it's a shared thing in real life too. I stole the logo from him. And I was like, "Hey, brother, can I use this for my own purposes?" He's like, "Yeah, sure, go ahead."
Your nefarious purposes.
I know, right? Neostar Productions is the Bundoverse. I like that one. Bundo. Yeah, we like Marlon Bundo. He's cute.
I do like that. I think that may be a winner if I can be bold to say that. That's got the ring. It's got a what's the word I'm looking for? There's a task. Oh man, doesn't matter right now.
What
Moving
makes me
on.
mad though is if you do a Google search for Marlon Bundo, you don't get Mike Pence's cute little rabbit. You get that stupid book by John Oliver. Makes me mad.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. What are you going to say? John Oliver is ridiculous and British. So,
Yeah, too bad that money couldn't afford better teeth, but it's okay.
well, some of us just have what we have.
That's true.
I was blessed with soft teeth from my Irish ancestry, so I'm missing more than a one. We'll just go with that.
That's okay. You're still a good guy.
Well, a good guy with holes in his mouth, but we'll move on.
Props to John Oliver. I mean, political parody and satire is fair game. So, he did it on his own. So more power to him too.
Fair enough. But anyway, one of the things I was wanting to change the subject entirely was Mark. Last week on Twitter, you mentioned that you were watching through the Max Headroom stuff.
Oh yeah.
As a child from the '80s, I remember that fondly.
It's funny. I remember. So I was born in '85, so I'm a '90s kid, but by the '90s, Max Headroom had already finished his peak. He was on the decline.
Yeah.
So I only knew Max Headroom as kind of a leftover from the '80s when he was waning. So I knew him as a commercial character, the Coke spokesman. Sometimes he'd pop up on TV, but he wasn't really. I didn't know that he had a mythology. I didn't even know at the time until I got reruns on the Sci-Fi Channel that he had his own drama sci-fi TV series.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know any of that. I certainly didn't know that he came from the UK and that he had a music video show and that he had his own talk show on Showtime. Didn't know any of that. And I found out later, but I just never really got into Max Headroom, even though I really like Matt Frewer. He's one of my favorite character actors. But then I just kind of got the spark to learn more about Max Headroom because I think a couple of weeks ago, Toy Galaxy, I think is the name of the channel on YouTube. They did a history of Max Headroom video, and I was like, all right, well, I want to track down this stuff, and so I tracked down 20 Minutes into the Future, which was the TV movie from the UK Channel 4 that has his origin, and then I found 5 episodes of the UK music video series, which has been tough to watch through. I might just have to skip over some of that because I've never heard of these Euro bands and they're all awful. I don't want to watch their music videos because they're always just complaining about America. These Germans and Swedes and Norwegians, they all their music is just there's one called Rats on a Stick where it's just we are Americans. We don't know what cooking is. We eat rats on stick, yeah. Okay, very clever. And then I have
listen, pal, we don't have blood sausage, okay? So just back up off of that, Jack.
Oh God. And I found the Showtime interview show, so I might just skip ahead and watch that. And if that's really cringy, I'll just go straight to the American sci-fi TV drama, which I'm actually really excited to watch because I liked 20 Minutes into the Future. And which is weird because it was directed by the same people who directed the Super Mario Brothers movie. And I was like, oh my God, now that I know that, I can see it. Basically, it's got the exact same tone and feel and look as the Mario Brothers movie. It's so obvious. And it was really good. And so I kind of want to see more of that. But yeah, no, I'm liking Max Headroom so far.
See, part of my I was born in '78, so I was very young in the '80s. But I remember watching the American ABC TV series.
Yeah. And
I'd seen him on commercials and stuff, and I didn't know he was a UK created property until I was in high school when it wasn't cool anymore, and it wasn't before the internet was a thing, but it was before I had any access to it. So of course we didn't have cable TV, we didn't have any of that kind of stuff. So I didn't see a lot of the other properties with him in there. But I was always fascinated with the concept, right? Because it was that kind of when the internet was becoming it was prophetic with what the internet became very quickly, right? The idea that networks are connected, that there's this combination of of information technology networks and entertainment technology networks and all the stuff that I think from my recollection, and of course, this is 20 years, right? 25 years ago. So I might be a little bit wrong because I'm old now. But it was far more accurate than a lot of other things that predicted the internet, right?
Well, the most accurate thing about it is that the idea is of a digital consciousness. So Edison Carter, for people who haven't watched Max Headroom, Edison Carter is an investigative journalist in a slightly dystopian future, a cyberpunk kind of future, and he's very serious. He's very dedicated to his job. He's a dedicated reporter. He's a serious character. He gets beaten up, and he gets his consciousness digitized, and a copy of his brain is uploaded into a computer as this digital entity that's connected to all the different networks, and for some reason hosts music video shows and Coca-Cola product placement. But so he has two versions of himself. He has his public self, Edison Carter, but on the internet he has Max Headroom, and his Max Headroom identity is basically his id unleashed. It's him being obnoxious. It's him saying everything he wants to say without any repercussions, no consequences. He's hiding behind a fake handle called Max Headroom. It's very much the internet as we know today, social media, message boards, where you can be someone who's very reserved and very normal in person, but as soon as you log into the internet and you're behind that handle, you can be a total jerk, you can be obnoxious, you can be absolutely awful and just be a totally different person. And this show came out, that the TV movie was made in 1985, when people were still using like alt.maxheadroom.info or whatever to
Right.
communicate with people. It very much predicted how we socialize and interact on the internet. God, like 20 years before that even really became a thing, or 15 years before that became a thing.
Neo in the chat says, I won't lie, the Super Mario Brothers movie was sort of a guilty pleasure for me. I never saw it until we bought the Riff Tracks version of it, and it's hilarious with the right jokes. I'll just say that.
I mean, so I saw it when I was a kid, and here's the thing is, I do like that movie, and as a kid, I liked that movie. I mean, I knew just from the first time I watched it that it had next to nothing to do with Mario Brothers. It didn't look like Mario Brothers. It was completely unrelated, but just as a special effects sci-fi kids movie, it's really fun. The only thing I really hate about that movie is that awful like score that sounds like 1950s public domain bus riding music. It goes through the whole damn movie.
I would never have called it that, but I know exactly what you mean.
Right? But Super Mario Brothers movie it's really fun. It's really stupid. It's got great special effects though. So it was directed by the creators of Max Headroom, but the set design was the set designer from Blade Runner. It's just so weird. Like, hey, we've got this Nintendo video game about a fantasy character in a fairyland who fights dragons and eats mushrooms, and it's very whimsical and fairy tale like. Let's get the creators of Max Headroom and the set designer for Blade Runner to make this movie. Like, that'll be a good fit. That'll be a great fit.
I've often wondered why they haven't done a Super Mario Brothers as more of a semi-serious fantasy in like cartoons and stuff. It's some of the cartoons are pretty straightforward, adaptations of the material, but with a world like they have there, and the
well, I can tell you why.
Well, why is that?
The reason why we haven't gotten any really weird Mario Brothers bullshit is because of that terrible movie. Nintendo cracked down on all their licensees because that movie was so badly received and so embarrassing for them. You'll notice that before the Mario Brothers movie, Nintendo licensed their properties out to a lot of like American companies like Valiant to make comic books, Deke to make those cartoons, and it was actually kind of common back then. Right after that movie, it just stops. I think there's the Donkey Kong Country cartoon that was made in France, and that's kind of it. Everything after that is like dubbed anime, like Kirby Right Back at Ya, and I think there was an F-Zero anime. But they just said, all right, America, no more. You're not making any more of our cartoons or movies or anything. And that's why everyone is so kind of like nervous about the Illumination Super Mario Brothers movie coming out, the animated film, because like this is Nintendo, after 20 years of saying no America ever again, giving an American studio another chance to make a Nintendo property movie.
Isn't Illumination half French though?
I think so. They're the Minions people.
Yeah,
so,
I think they're an American French co-production.
Well, maybe that could be it.
Well,
but whatever the
Pinky's
case is,
too, but
the Minions feel so American. You know, the very stupid kind of humor and characters and stuff we do. But yeah. Basically, though,
you're forgetting that Jerry Lewis
is very popular in France. You're right. So, yes.
That's one of those things. You know, the French like to pretend they're all fancy, but they love Jerry Lewis. So
the French are so strange in that, you know, when Euro Disneyland opened up in Paris, they blew up the tracks to the trains that went there. They blew up the substations. They protested and they rioted. They hated Disney that much. They hated the presence of a gaudy Disneyland in Paris. But then they love Jerry Lewis. So
yeah,
what's the rhyme or reason? I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't know. Inspector Gadget was invented in France too, but one of those things. But anyway, the reason I bring up the Max Headroom thing, in addition to having the idea, the fun of all of that, and actually before I do that, I'm gonna pump my own products for just a second. Also, talking about Nintendo cartoons and licensing, Captain N the Game Master.
Oh yeah.
Was one of the inspirations behind our character Game Boy, who has a roleplay account for him on Twitter. And sometimes you can check out his nonsense on there. I occasionally get on that with that.
Well, it's funny. You notice that there's kind of almost a subgenre in and of itself, where movies like Tron, cartoons like Captain N, and TV shows like Max Headroom, which is about like the digitizing of a human persona and placed into cyberspace. You know, as soon as someone came with the word cyberspace, we all had these crazy ideas of what it was. But all those things are the same, where it's a person being taken out of the real world and put in the digital world. And that's a fascinating concept in and of itself, but usually it leads
that was one of the core concepts of our Game Boy character, is that's his power. He's able to enter into any electronic network and manipulate it inside. He's I don't know if you've seen the film Overdrawn of the Memory Bank.
I have. I saw it on Mystery Science Theater 3000. Yes.
It has that concept of being interfaced. And so we've stolen that idea, and Game Boy is completely and naturally interfaced, and can just by intuition can communicate with any network that way. And
in the 90s, a comic I really liked was Ghost Rider 2099, which was Ghost Rider of the Internet.
Yep. Yeah, that's fun.
With a chainsaw.
We played with that with Game Boy a little bit, and we have Matt Johnson had a comic, Cortland, that has some of the same kind of thematics, and so we've done a little bit of crossover stuff and everything with that. That's been fun. Which will soon all be available on our website, forceofthegoodandevil.net, for free. But back to the subject of Max Headroom, one of the things in reading, because I watched the video and I read some articles that you shared, and one of the things that I thought was pardon me for just a moment, what was really interesting was the commentary that somebody made that Matt Frewer, I can't remember his character's name, was supposed to represent this idealized liberal, whereas Max was supposed to represent this idealized conservative. And it was interviews from talking about it from back in the day, and I'm not sure that really makes any sense. And so I was wondering, since you're in the middle of political commentary and mockery with your products, if you had any ideas after having watched 20 Minutes in the Future and all that kind of stuff, if you thought that observation held up this much time later.
Well, I don't think I'm far enough into watching Max Headroom to be able to make an informed statement on that, because when I watched 20 Minutes in the Future, I was kind of disappointed because Max Headroom is actually barely in that movie. He's more of like a gimmick. And I didn't understand like why he's only in the movie for like 5 minutes, and he almost has no effect on the plot whatsoever. I was like, what's the point of this? And then I read up on it, was that right after they aired the TV movie, then they premiered the music video show. So the TV movie is basically the origin story for the music video show. The point was that you're supposed to watch that movie where that barely has Max Headroom in it and go directly from that into like his VJing and see him, talk about these terrible Euro bands. But just from what I've seen, I've watched some of those interviews as well, and the creators, they're very liberal. Then they're European, of course. They're British, so they're very liberal. And one of the things they go on is like basically they say like, oh yeah, Edison Carter is always, he's a journalist in search of the truth. He's all these great idealized aspects, whereas Max Headroom, like, oh, he's vocal, he's obnoxious, he's loud, he's rude, he insults people, he's the basic conservative. So it's basically they wrap all these negative traits into what they consider the conservative character, and all these virtuous positive traits into what they consider the liberal character. Well, so it is very biased and partisan.
Yeah, and one of the things too is, thinking about it from a British 80s perspective, conservative and liberal don't mean the same as we would use today.
Yeah, no, I'm looking at it from an American.
They even mean the same as they meant in America in the 80s.
Yeah.
It's been a pet peeve of mine for a long time. Probably 12 years since I really noticed that the terminology we use is so loose that it really doesn't help us discuss what's really going on with issues.
Yeah.
And I don't want to derail everything with a long discussion of the semantics of how we talk about politics, but it bugs me.
Well, it's kind of like this. Like, even if you look at the election, for example, Trump was able to open up the tent for what is considered like conservative now, to the point where even libertarians are kind of self-identifying as conservatives. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that as the left pushes more left, they're moving that goalpost, and they're basically forcing former centrists and leftists into choosing a position they didn't want to. We were watching the documentary, speaking of like Euro Disneyland, if you have Disney Plus, the Imagineering story is really good. And I think it's in episode 4 where they talk about the Eisner years. They talk about the opening of Euro Disneyland, and they talk about how French communists brought eggs to Michael Eisner's speech and dedication and pelted him with eggs. But then it was, I was thinking to myself, I was like, okay, they're commies. But their entire logic was they had this kind of nationalism where they're trying to basically preserve French culture because they saw Americanism as being gauche. And so I was like, this is really weird, because on one hand, I think politically, I would say, yeah, I'm not pro-communist at all. I mean, I pretty much hate everything that communism stands for. But in terms of nationalism, in terms of the French basically having the opinion that they don't want any American influence, that's going to be very hard for me to defend. So you're right. Like, if you look at different things, politics has its place in the art, if nothing more than being kind of a milestone of how kind of things were seen at the time, depending on your point of view.
I'd also like to point out that the idea that the French calling anything gauche when they hosted the Moulin Rouge is a little hypocritical.
Yes, that's absolutely true. I remember, so Moulin Rouge is a real place in the Pigalle area of Paris. And I remember when I was a student in France in 2000, you got off the metro, you got into this area called Pigalle, and it's weird. It's like being in the Twilight Zone. It's the closest thing you'll ever feel like to like teleporting to another like dimension, because you get off the subway and suddenly you're in this area of town devoted to nothing but basically sex. Like, that's the whole area of this part of Paris. And I just remember how weird it was, and it was sleazy and gross, and not what you think of when you think of, so to speak.
Yeah. yeah, that's one of those things. The whole thing. But anyway, that's a whole different deal. And I have to say I don't have a lot of respect for French culture when they let the terror happen. But that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah, that is a whole different conversation. But right now, the mainstream media is not covering it. But right now, the French are rebelling against their government. Their yellow vest. It was pointed out in the comment section right now by Star Storyteller. But yeah, the French are rioting, and they've been doing it for months, and they aren't calming down. They aren't slowing down. Their firefighters are actually fighting against their cops because the cops are trying to break up the riots, and the firefighters are siding with the rioters. Like it's actually really intense and amazing, and it's getting zero coverage from the mainstream global media because it doesn't further the narrative that they want. So,
well, and this is actually one of the interesting things about the history of France and French politics, and the situation that and so I get into this conversation a lot with people about why we use left and right and what those can possibly mean and all that kind of stuff. And I don't want to get into the thick of it here, but one of the big conflicts between the left and the right in post-terror France was the left felt like Paris should run everything, and the right felt that maybe Paris shouldn't run everything, and maybe we shouldn't kill all the Catholics. And that was the one of the large points of the debate between them is where should power be held. And while the French leftists, the conservatives, the right were not what you'd call a freedom party by any real standard, they still didn't want as much centralized control as the left, because the old system of baronrics and the old system of marquises and all that other stuff had power diluted across the countryside, and that's better to my thinking. That's really the core of the left-right divide, is who gets to run stuff, and is it run down the street at the city hall, or is it run in your front of your living room, or is it run by the big wigs and the elitists in your major metropolitan areas? And so the one thing, that's probably the best thing about the Yellow Vest protests that I see, that people are starting to say, no, we can handle this. Paris, maybe you should just go back and smoke your cigarettes and drink your coffee and leave us the hell alone. And, I think that's a good message.
I was waiting on Tim to say something. Sorry, no. I agree. Yeah,
I completely agree with that sentiment. And when I was living there, so I was in Paris for a week, and then I spent the rest of the time in Orléans, which is about an hour south of Paris. Mm-hmm. And it really is kind of what you described. It's kind of like what we have right now with our electoral system. The entire reason we have an electoral college was actually because they learned from how democracies in other countries had worked, the countries that they had come from, and they knew that essentially a pure democracy can essentially be mob rule, but also part of the electoral college is that you have to give power a fighting chance to people in rural areas, places that are not part of a centralized system, to have a say in terms of their governance. And that's why we have this whole kind of federal versus state issue going on right now. And part of I think the wisdom of Trump is that he has an understanding of that, at least on a fundamental level, which is why harder to tackle concepts, he just defaults to the idea that, well, I think that the state should decide. I think that the municipalities and the states should decide, not the federal government. And it's funny because you look at France. France is actually a relatively small country in terms of its geographic size. But what you're basically talking about is kind of a microcosm of what's going on here as well.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too that I think that part of the reason for that, and I think this is something that the founders of this country figured out, is that collective control and collective groupthink is birthed in cities, where you get to collectivize harm. You get to collectivize everyone's all together, and so everybody can help out like the idea or be equally taken advantage of. Whereas out in the sticks, it's every man for themselves, because that's just how it works. And so then people get to voluntarily help each other out, but nobody's expecting that. If it's a bad winter and all of your people die, well, it's a real rough, man. I'm sorry, but I got to take care of mine. And I think that requires people to voluntarily band together, but it also gives everybody the ability to fend for themselves. You don't have that so much in cities, and I think that's part of why the rural America has stayed more independent-minded, because they're used to being actually independent. Whereas people in the cities are expecting the buses to run on time, and expecting the trash to be taken out, and expecting the cops to show up after everyone's already dead. I mean, save the day, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's like what was it? It was the governor or the mayor of London said a couple of years ago that knife attacks are just part of living in a Western city.
Part and parcel, yeah.
No, it's not.
I know.
It's an unacceptable way to live. Don't settle for somebody stabbing you.
Yeah, none of that should have to be taken as granted. But that's a whole other topic in terms of Sadiq Khan and all that stuff going on with London. God bless our people across the pond. Finally they broke away from the EU. Now, now let's see what they do with that.
Well, I don't think I can get into this conversation after 2 hours. I think
we are winding down the show. We've got about 10 minutes left. So for those, we do have some people that came in a little later. Why don't we go ahead and go back to talking about Kamen America a little bit? But before we do, I do want to go ahead and give a shout out to everybody in the chat. If you guys haven't checked out Napalm Brothers on Indiegogo, do it. I don't have the link ready, so I can't share it out there. But that book looks legit, and I'm so excited. I'm probably going to be backing it tomorrow. As I mentioned, it's payday. Doug Garrett is producing that, and it's the art and story by Six Scale Combat, and it looks like awesome. Do that because you can back that one first, and then next payday, you can take a look at Kamen America. Yeah,
so that's 2 books for $20 essentially.
Yeah, look at that.
I can't afford not to buy it.
So is that going to be $10 shipped, or is that $10 plus shipping?
$10 and then shipping will be $5, so $15 even.
Oh man, that's really good.
Yeah, and we are okay. I did talk about doing a $5 digital tier, but what we're going to do is, if we get successfully funded later on, we're going to release a shortened version on Comixology for $5. So it will have a digital component, but it won't be until after the physical copies have been shipped.
And are you going to have like a comic shop release of that as well? Is that going to be available for?
We hope so. I mean, Antarctic Press, they get first dibs on everything that we do. So if they take a look at it and they like it, they'll let me know, and then we'll release it to them. Kind of like with Black Ops too. That was actually kind of a last minute thing. It took them a while to kind of getting around to reading it, but finally around October, November is when they told me they wanted to put it in stores. So that's actually going to be out in March, so next month. And that one is similar to the Indiegogo version, but because we want to reward the backers, we always throw in an extra 8 pages. So that's the key difference between the retail and the campaign versions. The campaign version is higher quality, thicker paper, square bound, has the perks attached to it, has extra pages. The retail version, not square bound, minus 8 extra pages, obviously no perks attached to it. But it's cheaper, that's for sure.
Yeah. And so it features the ongoing adventures of, I have forgotten her real name.
Charlotte Vanders.
Charlie Vanders.
Yeah. Charlotte Vanders, yes. So the essential plot of Kamen America is Charlotte Vanders is a seamstress. She's a USO line girl, and she gets struck by an object from space. She gets electricity and lightning-based powers, and she fights giant monsters. But our tagline, or our log line for the book, is superstar, super soldier, or superheroine. Carly Vanders has to decide in this kind of crazy world what her role is in terms of the grand scheme of what she wants to be. But that's essentially what the plot is.
Very cool. Very cool. It's 64? 56.
56 pages.
56 pages. I'm just throwing numbers that are randomly divisible by 4.
Or divisible by 8. That's how comics are typically printed physically, is either by 4s or by 8s.
Right.
So just for our purposes, we go by 8s, just to make sure.
Very cool. It's exciting, and we'll be launching either next Wednesday or
the Wednesday after. Correct.
And probably on Indiegogo.
Definitely on Indiegogo. Still trying to explore Kickstarter as a possibility.
Okay. Very cool. Well, that sounds exciting, guys. I'm so glad to have had you on. It's been a riveting conversation full of all kinds of things. And Mark, I will have to talk to you when you finish Max Headroom to finish our discussion of the political implications of pop culture icons.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I like to be able to talk with somebody because right now I haven't met anybody who gives a damn about Max Headroom. So yeah, I would like to talk to somebody about it.
Oh yeah. I've like I said, it's a fond memory, and I watched the ABC series when I was little, so I've wanted to revisit it and I just haven't been able to. So it's one of those things that I'm excited to hear your thoughts on that as it moves on. So
definitely.
Yeah. And so guys, go ahead and keep your eyes out. Tim and Mark are going to be cranking comics out like there is no tomorrow this year. 2020 is the year of the rabbit. Don't let anyone tell you different. And I'm excited for it, guys. I really am a big. Oh, I did have one question before we cut off. In Black Ops 2, when they are under the island, there is a skeleton in a Robin Hood costume.
Oh, you found it. Okay.
What the heck is that thing?
Okay, so I'm glad that you mentioned that. Now we have to have a different stream about Black Ops. But anyway, real quick. So the action takes place on Hart Island, which, unless you're actually from New York, you don't realize that that's a real island. That is a real island in New York. That's actually where they bury their dead. That's where they bury. It's a potter's field. So the voice of Peter Pan, the Disney Peter Pan that we remember from childhood, that was Bobby Driscoll. He was also the child in Song of the South. When he entered puberty, he couldn't make it as a child actor. So for most of his adult life, he was a drug addict, and he died in New York, unidentified, later in life. And at the time, fingerprinting technology was relatively new, but luckily they had the foresight to save his fingerprints on file. They buried him on Hart Island in a pauper's grave, not knowing who he was, until years later when a family member was doing a nationwide search for Bobby Driscoll, and they found through fingerprint analysis that was him, that he was buried on the island. So that was an Easter egg. That's Peter Pan on Hart Island.
Wow, that's insane. That's a hell of a story, man.
And you're officially the only person who has noticed that.
Yeah, well, actually, if you look at the video, Marmaduke's review video, he mentions it, but he doesn't go any farther.
Correct. Yes, he doesn't.
I wonder if this is an Easter egg, but
right.
Nobody's been able to ask it.
Yeah, that's a major Easter egg. The other one is that the map of Hart Island is accurate. I actually redrew Hart Island, and so it is a real place. You can look it up. It's very interesting, the history of it.
Yeah, I assumed it was. It had the feeling of something like that.
And interestingly enough, in 1956, there was a military installation there, which is why it made the perfect setting, because that's where the government put cryptic. They actually stashed them under the island and where the Ajax missile silos used to be. So it's all accurate.
Wow, that's insane. I was wondering if it wasn't I thought it might be a hint to like a Golden Age character that you were like sneaking in there somewhere. But that's actually that's an intense story. It's real sad too, but man.
It's very sad and very tragic. But yeah, that's a legit thing. And I think Comic Book Cut mentioned it because he's from New York, so he knows that Hart Island is like a real thing. But Mark, I don't know. We actually didn't have that many Easter eggs in the book. That was like the big one.
No, not in that one. So we got a ton of Easter eggs in like Kamen America, and obviously in the Wall Knight books, they're all over the place. But since Black Ops takes itself a bit more seriously, we don't stuff it with distracting Easter eggs too much. So yeah, that one was pretty straightforward.
The first one had a few that I've picked out. Most of them were very low key and didn't have any story impact.
Yeah, like the Freeling family is named after Friz Freeling, one of the Bugs Bunny directors. So that's an Easter egg, but that's one of those low key ones. That's not. Yeah.
His wife's name is Beatrix, which is like Beatrix Potter, who did Peter Rabbit. It's stuff like that. It amuses us, but if you don't notice it, it doesn't take away from the story.
I didn't notice either of those, but that's crazy. Anyway, thank you guys so much for coming on. It was a heck of a show. I really enjoyed it. Chat, you guys, as always, are great. I hope you enjoy it as well. If you like it. If you share it, share it. If you don't, that's also cool, because I just do this for kicks. Do go ahead and make sure you follow Mark and Tim on Twitter. Their content is grade A. The comics are wonderful, and I love them. And if you want to help out this humble webcomicer, you can check out patreon.com/ideal_comics for exclusive comic content. And we're also going to be looking to pre-sell some projects on there in the next 6 months, too. So, yeah, that's the story, guys. Thanks for tuning in, and we're going to call it a night. So you guys enjoy it.
Cool. Night, everybody.
Thank you very much. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah, it was a great time.
Yeah.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night. Gotta get the right